So, I'm from the 20th century, but I'm using a 21st century tool to try to stay under my 5 minutes. I was reflecting this morning on how much easier it is to speak to a group of 8th graders than it is to talk to a room full of adults. And I was still reflecting on that when we started this process this morning, but as I've been listening to the presentations from these wonderful teachers, that kind of drifted away, and I was reflecting instead on how grateful I am that I've been able to have this experience, because even this morning, towards the end of this experience, I find that it actually never ends, because I keep hearing things and I say, oh yeah, I've experienced that, or oh, I need to try that, or wow, I should focus on that as well. So instead of waiting until the end to say thank you, I want to say thank you now, because I'm very grateful that I can keep in touch with all of these people and keep utilizing all of the expertise in this room to not really help myself, although that's a great benefit, but more importantly to help my students. I'd also like to point out that the screen up here went blank just in time for my presentation, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence. So I want to talk to you about how my students react and interact with the seminar topics. I was fortunate enough to be in the race class and punishment seminar where we talked about things like mass incarceration, the school-to-prison pipeline, etc. And I wanted my students to think about all of those different issues, but through the lens of immigration, because I knew that for my students at Hoover, immigration was not something they read about in the newspapers or see on social media. It's something that they live every day. So the objectives I had were to tie the seminar topics to our 8th grade curriculum. And one of the things that we study in 8th grade, whether it's me or anyone else teaching it in California, are the Declaration of Independence and the documents of government. And the Declaration of Independence says that all men are created equal. So I asked my students to think about why all people were not created equal. Why was it just men that were created equal? And if we think about all people being created equal, is that really the world that we see around us? And so they are trying to decide, and they can make a quick decision, right? Because everybody sees racism in the world around them. But we're trying to go a little bit deeper than that by focusing on some of these topics from the seminar. And the one takeaway I'd like you to have from my brief remarks today is about student engagement. I got this paper from Precious, and I went and showed it to some of my coworkers, and I asked them what they saw. And they saw a messy paper that looked like it had been rushed. They saw capitalization errors, punctuation errors, and incomplete sentences. When I looked at this paper, I saw a paper from a student that rarely completed any work at all, suddenly engaged in what was going on in the classroom, listening to the comments taking place around her, doing work, passing it in, and that's because of the relevant subject matter, and that ties back to my experiences here. Our opening overview was a gallery walk where they were given colored dots to comment on quotes about racial and family separation issues, and they were asked whether or not they agreed or disagreed with the quote and whether or not they understood it or not. So you can see that something with a lot of green, like the Declaration of Independence excerpt, was something that they mostly agreed with and understood. The quote on the Statue of Liberty about giving me your tired, your poor, and your huddled masses, they were not familiar with at all. So you see lots of yellow. In the middle, you see a lot of green, but let me talk about the outside first. When Donald Trump announced his candidacy for president, he said that people from Mexico were not sending their best people. And my students read that quote again. And in the middle of the family separation crisis, Jeff Sessions says that if people don't want to be separated from their children, then they shouldn't bring their children with them. These are issues and attitudes that impact my students directly. And you can see from the green on the right-hand side that they understood what was being said, but by the red on the left-hand side, they didn't agree with what was being said. On the other hand, when Laura Bush said that we are a nation of people that welcomes everyone and should be acting like it, they both agreed and understood that message. So we talked about immigration, and we talked about asylum, we talked about, and I'm going to go over my 5 minutes, I'm sorry. We talked about why someone would want to come here and become an American. So I asked my students, what is an American? And does that different from what a citizen is? And I won't read all of these to you, but a couple of them stuck out to me. Pearl says that she thinks being an American sucks. Anyone can be an American, but I don't think we want to be an American. So I appreciated the fact that she felt comfortable enough to share that opinion with me. On the other hand, I had a student that said, if you were born here but your parents were not, then they are not American. It doesn't matter if they filled out papers, they were not born here. So that student felt comfortable enough to share an opinion that was not the majority opinion in the classroom, but they felt like they could share that and have a voice. Levi said, well, being an American is what the stereotype says. You're a fat person who only eats at McDonald's. You're a jock who doesn't know a single thing about academics. You're a person who drinks Starbucks and wears Uggs all the time. But then he got a little more thoughtful and he said, I think being an actual American is accepting others for who they are. And that's what Americans should be. Mariah said, I think being an American is hard because you're not like others and even people get bullied just for being another skin color and their looks. But I'm grateful to be an American. And Precious said she didn't feel like an American because the first thing people ask her is if she's from Africa. So these are the realities that my students are living and the things they are thinking when they think about what it means to be an American. We then focused on the family separation crisis. I didn't give them a whole lot of information because I wanted to investigate it on their own. And they were asked to put together an infographic that answered the W questions, and that's the last thing we got a chance to do before I came out here. So here's a couple of samples of the students' work. They're telling you the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why about family separation, and they're trying to reinforce the message both with text and with pictures. As we continue to move through the unit, we will talk about mass incarceration, and then we'll talk about the history of immigration, the dual messages that this country sends or has sent in the past. When it needs workers, immigrants are welcome, but when those immigrants start to take the jobs of Americans, and again, what is an American? Then they're not welcome any longer, and the policies start to change. So my students will investigate those cycles, and then we'll go back to family separation, which is, once again, in the news as a current event, and they will try to focus on solutions. So the end goal for my students is not only to learn about these issues, but to try to think about what can they do, and I challenge them not what someone could do somewhere, but what could they do personally that could affect what was going on around them. So again, I guess I'll say thank you again, because this experience has really been a great one for me, but more importantly, for the students that I teach, and hopefully for the school as I start to spread this message around Hoover Middle School and around San José Unified as well. So, thank you.